It's been a while since there was a good Dracula movie. And for a Catholic, this is a pretty dangerous field full of sex, gratuitous horror, and not a few theological errors that relegates one back to the old 1930s black and white with Bela Lugosi if you want something decent. But never fear, Hollywood for once has endeavored to give us something new, breaking the pace of the endless remakes of classic movies from 2010. We have The Last Voyage of the Demeter, an adaptation from Chapter 7 of Stoker's original novel, where the captain's log gives testimony of the gradual death of every member of the crew. It's actually a unique and creative idea, focusing on an area that is passed over in other movies, to give a horror drama. Well, let's see how it holds up. In the book, the captain's log gives us the outline of the plot. A Russian ship chartered to take goods from Romania to London. As they set out, there's a sense of dread, but that gives way for a while. Then men start disappearing, and the captain ties himself to the ship's wheel in order to make sure the ship gets in, holding a crucifix for protection. The first mate looks in vain throughout the cargo hold and eventually encounters Dracula and throws himself off the ship. As the ship goes into port, the captain holding up his crucifix, Dracula, who had been killing the crew one by one, takes the form of a dog and runs off. The companies try to remove the cargo, run in and grab it, and that's it. And as you find out in the course of Stoker's novel, the cargo is just dirt because Dracula has to lay in the dirt from his own country. There's nothing more. It takes about 2.5 pages in the book. But it is fertile ground for a decent film, or the recipe for disaster. And Hollywood doesn't disappoint in making a mess out of something that could have been a triumph. So, going back to the film opens up in Romania, where people are playing cards, and a ship is looking to take on extra hands. Enter one Clemens, an English black man who is a doctor, inexplicably in Romania. We'll find out a little bit about that a little bit later. And he tries in vain to convince the first mate that he is the man they're looking for. But his hands show that he hasn't done much work, so they reject him. Later, while loading the cargo onto the ship, some random men show up with a delivery of a box with a dragon on it and declare they have to be gone before sundown. As the cargo is being loaded on the ship, there's an accident, and it almost lands upon the captain's grandson, who is saved by the aforementioned Clemens. One of the ship's hands is responsible, so he gets gone. And, well, being short of hand, Mr. Clemens, our intrepid English black man, who is a doctor, is brought on to the ship as a first mate. No, sorry, not as a first mate, but as a mate, as a crewman on the ship. The captain, played convincingly by Liam Elliott, even though he's supposed to be Russian, but hey, whatever. He's pleased with the progress, and he announces bonuses for arriving on time. We get decent introductions to the rest of the crew, including Joseph, the cook, who declares that if you take God's name in vain, he won't give you dinner. And Toby, the captain's grandson, affirms he really won't. When the crew come together, Clemens declares himself as a natural scientist who wants to discover the reality of all things in the world. Hey, fair enough. But he gets his opportunity to discover the strangest thing when the cargo overturns in the hold, and on inspection, they find a pile of dirt with a woman in it who's half dead. The crew wants to throw her overboard as a stowaway, but Clemens insists on treating her for some kind of strange infection that causes loss of blood by giving her transfusions from himself. This is a bit of a callback to the discussion about transfusion in the original novel, which you can also see in the 1931 classic with Bela Lugosi. But hey, why not? Might as well. The captain reluctantly agrees, but unbeknownst to the crew, Dracula wakes up and finds his food is gone. So, he kills all of their animals, and the dog, poor doggo, in a rather vicious manner. The crew discover it, and they're all worked up, but the captain simply declares that all the animals must be thrown overboard. Better trust in your cabbages and potatoes, mate. But Dracula's not done. He begins taking out members of the crew, a few at a time. Just in time to move the plot along, of course, the Romanian woman, Anna, wakes up and tells Clemens about this horrible monster, Dracula from her village. She's beautiful, too beautiful from what her character could possibly be, and she's resilient, resourceful, and magically knows how to handle both ships and guns, but again, hey, whatever. As the feeling of dread comes upon the crew, they know that some kind of monster is aboard, and more crew members begin disappearing. They manage to find one who is only the whites of his eyes, out to murder the rest of them, but he burns up in the sun. Dracula even kills the captain's grandson rather gruesomely, and they're all confused as to what to do. The cook tries to flee the ship at night when the monster comes out, of course, because you wouldn't do it during the day when you see all your fellows being killed at night, but again, whatever. And he discovers it has wings now, and it gets him anyway. At last, they work out a plan to try to shoot the monster, but he overcomes that. And it's at last Clemens and Anna who trap the monster as they themselves escape, only for Dracula to escape when the ship reaches the coast and makes his way to London. And of course, it's Clemens and Anna who are not in the book, but they're the ones who make it to the end. As far as the positive elements, the acting is all well done. For the most part, with Liam Cunningham stealing the show as Captain Elliot, frankly. The crew are all sufficiently introduced. Nobody feels like they have nothing to do. As the cook foretells, there is no blasphemy and very little bad language. All good points in the film's favor, especially when you compare it with other Dracula movies of late. But the film fails in several crucial points. In terms of its marketing, it was simply called The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Nobody seemed to know what it was about or what was happening. Even a lot of folks that would have been happy to see it. Maybe if they called it Dracula, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, it might have got more attention. Even my own theater was pretty empty. Maybe 2 or 3 other people besides myself and a mate. Second, the presentation of Dracula falls into the same problems that many modern horror films fall into. They show too much of and lose all the mystery. The framework of the story is essentially a classical haunted house with a monster in it, except it's on a boat. Other movies use the same idea. Most especially, probably the best of all, is the 1979 classic Alien. In Alien, you see the creature for all of 2 minutes in the entire movie. They're very sparing with what you see, making the full revelation of the creature at the end all the more dramatic. A culmination of all the tension built by the killing of the crew one by one. Conversely, in The Last Voyage of the Demeter, they just can't help themselves from showing more of Dracula at every chance they can, whether you need to see him or not. Worse, in the book, Dracula is an intelligent, calculating creature. He takes many forms. He looks like a man, and then makes himself like a bat, or a dog, or whatever else. In the film, they try to make him both calculating, but assaulting the crew with the force and violence of some horrific wild animal, who even gruesomely kills the captain's grandson, who is, again, another invented character, not in the book. This actually takes the gas out of his presence, and when you actually see the monster directly, instead of little glimpses through a looking glass or what have you, he has a big nose that makes him look like Quark from Deep Space Nine, and almost comical rather than this terrifying monster. The real problem with this is in a horror movie, it becomes gore for gore's sake. The less you see of a monster, the more terrifying it is. And we see this in classic movies like Alien or even Predator, where you only see the fullness of the alien at the end of the movie. And really, in a far more salubrious setting, we can look at this in 16th century painting. For the principle, the less is more principle. Caravaggio was somebody who understood this. In his work depicting the calling of St. Matthew, which can still be seen today in the Church of St. Louis of the French, the most important figure in that painting is Christ. But Caravaggio does something completely counterintuitive, and as far as the painting at that time was concerned, almost revolutionary. He covers him up. The less you see of him, the better. And the more you focus on the light of the gospel coming to Matthew, the miserable sinner. Because there's less of the obvious focal point, which is Christ. You know he's there, but you only see so much. there's a reason why Martin Scorsese calls Caravaggio the founder of modern cinematography, and he's not terribly wrong, whatever you think about Scorsese otherwise. So now, returning to less salubrious subjects, the less you see of a monster, and the more of its consequences, the more terrifying it becomes both emotionally and intellectually. If they'd showed the concern for a missing crew member with a few drops of blood, it would raise attention and fear far above what we actually got. Then there's certain things that just don't make any sense from a logical standpoint. At a certain point, Clemens, aided by the impossibly attractive Anna, who was originally found half dead in a coffin of dirt, they find Dracula's box in the presence of a walking stick in the dirt, which of course has a dragon on it. Ooh, Dracula, dragon, yeah, you get it, right? This means that they know where he sleeps during the day. Moreover, since they've seen that the people Dracula bites who survive turn into flames in the sun, why wouldn't it logically occur to them that maybe they should pull this box up during the day and expose it to the sun, since it only comes out at night? Or again, they know the monster comes out at night. Why didn't they scuttle the ship and escape during the day? Well, because the plot needs them to do otherwise and not act intelligently. Now let's get back to our inserted new characters. Anna is supposedly from some obscure Eastern European village in Romania and was brokered as some offering to Dracula for him to feed on during his passage to London. But somehow she is knowledgeable about science, about all of Dracula's ins and outs. She's proficient in the use of guns, even at one point where Clemens is attempting to teach her, and she immediately handles it and cocks it, knows how to use it better than he does. Now, these guns are no joke. I mean, what they're basically using is a German needle gun, and those required a lot of care and attention to use efficiently and correctly. Yet she is an expert in it, somehow, being from some small, obscure village. But anyway, in the 19th century. She also shows a cooler head and a better train of thought than any of the men on the crew. And of course, she makes it until nearly the end of the film. Hey, strong woman, go. Clemens, one of the main characters, is a doctor. Now, let me just say the actor plays the role perfectly well. The actor is a perfectly likable actor. I've got nothing against him. But it's rather the writing that he's given, especially towards the end. At a certain point, he begins his soliloquy about race and white supremacy, awkwardly inserted into a discussion about the plan, how it is he's coming up with a plan after everything that's happened. And this is inserted into the story with all the care and elegance of an elephant doing the waltz. He tells us that he was the first black man to graduate from Oxford. Well, he's off by a bit, since that was actually 20 years before his time. And even before that, before any black man graduated from Oxford, well, you have Alexander Cummel in 1853. Graduated from Cambridge 40 years before the story takes place. And if we really want to get into it, the first black doctor in the British Isles was James McCune Smith, who graduated from the University of Glasgow in 1837, 60 years before the story takes place. But, hey, whatever. The DEI departments, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion department needs some racial statement, I'm sure. And Clemens goes on that he was hired to be the chief physician for the King of Romania, so we fill in a little detail about how he got there in the beginning of the movie. But it couldn't, but he was fired because of the color of his skin. No, it couldn't possibly be that, well, he is neither Catholic nor Orthodox, and so therefore not the religion of the king, and he didn't trust him. Maybe that's actually a far more plausible reason. Because in the late 19th century, blacks were making their way in Europe from English or French colonies, and the type of racism that black Americans experienced in the United States was not endemic of their experience in Europe. After all, Augustus Tolton, the first black American priest, was sent to Italy and trained in the pontifical universities and received an incredible education, and was sent back to the U.S. by the Vatican precisely to test how modern a country the U.S. really was. Because that type of racial discrimination was not the order of the day in Europe. Now, it doesn't mean it didn't happen, doesn't mean it didn't exist, but it wasn't the normal order of the day. especially in institutions that consider themselves more enlightened. And of course, we have to shoehorn our contemporary politics into a 19th century narrative, so here we are. And I could go on about this, but ultimately the DEI department needed to get their message inserted, so there it was. Now, then there's the role of religion. In Stoker's novel, crucifixes, rosaries, holy water, etc., they're all useful things against Dracula. Garlic is a useful thing. Now, why is that? Dracula is an undead monster. And part of the message of Stoker's novel is that science can't explain everything. Monsters still exist, and religion still has a place. Natural remedies, things that are taken now as old wives' tales, like the garlic, all have a place. This is turned on its head by the film, which decides that no religious elements have any effect against Dracula. It presents him as a freak of nature that science will eventually explain through the person of Mr. Clemens, our agnostic black scientist who wants to discover the truth of all the world. The cook is killed with his Bible in the rowboat. The captain is mercilessly killed after he confronts Dracula with his rosary, as if to say religion is worthless. It's not anti-Catholic per se, but rather it's anti-religion, with Catholicism simply being the religion of choice for the showrunners to portray as ineffectual, given that's the chief religion dealt with in the book, even by Anglicans who aren't particularly believers in Catholicism. But just the same, they are able to use the sacramentals to good effect. Not in this film. It's all really a shame, because otherwise the film had all the potential to be really good. By the end, Dracula just seemed so ridiculous that I wasn't at all afraid even leaving the theater at 2 a.m. But there we are. Even where the visuals were good and the CGI has been neglected in favor of superior practical effects, the film still required more authenticity and more reserve than the producers and directors were ready to give us. So, I have to give the film a C-. I really wanted to like it. I really did. But even with the woke elements, I would have rated it higher. But the anti-religious elements, the lack of reserve in showing us Dracula, the poor execution of a number of other elements, I just couldn't do it. So, because I don't want to sit here and review movies I hate. I want to find things that are good and cue you into things that are good. So if you want to know about Voyage with Demeter, these are the things that I've noted. You can also see the stream that Dr. Anthony Stein and myself, as well as Dr. Stein's wife, did on this subject. So anyway, I've got more smoking to do. I'll see you next time.